So welcome everyone. It's great to see you all, and especially missed you after being away on 3 weeks of meditation. So I'd like to talk a bit about that. I'm going to try to keep the talking down a little bit so that you have time for any questions you might have about retreats in general, or other questions about the retreat I was on in particular. Just leave some time for those kinds of questions. I did want to talk a little bit about kind of a core practice that I engaged with at the beginning of the retreat in particular, that I found very useful and helpful in untangling the tangle, as the Buddha liked to say, to untangle the tangle that we're caught in. And so these are, I engaged in a variety of practices throughout the retreat, because 3 weeks is a lot of meditation. I kind of calculated that I did the equivalent of 8 months of what I would normally do in meditation in a period of 3 weeks. So, meditating from 5 in the morning till 10 at night, with the odd tea thrown in, and of course, walking meditation and some yoga practice. The need to move the body in between all the sitting. So when the retreat started, I had a fairly large release right off near the beginning, in terms of the ego falling away. You could call it, and so after that, the practice was really about looking and just seeing, okay, where are the egoic thoughts? Just waiting for egoic thoughts. And of course, for some time there weren't any. And of course, they're then in the deeper the stillness got, some things did arise. And I kind of called this, how do we unenlighten ourselves? Because really I've said in the past, we're already enlightened, right? We're already a manifestation of truth. We've just obscured it, right? We're so caught up in our self-referential thoughts that we've blocked our true nature from being able to reveal itself. So basically, I was sitting back and going, in the stillness, going, okay, well, waiting for a thought that would pull me back into the trance, or unenlighten me, pull me back into the dream, into the egoic state. So I was just kind of on the lookout, really just sitting and on the lookout for any thoughts that felt divisive, like they're thoughts pulling me into a sense of separation. If I'm being pulled back into illusion or back into separation? And the question was, how just waiting for these unenlightening thoughts to arise. And this is actually a practice you can do all day. And it's not a formal sitting practice. In fact, it's quite effective, almost more so as you wander about and interact with people, because those types of thoughts may be triggered more often when you're with people, right? So, for example, I could be sitting, during a meal, and eating, and I would look at somebody, and a judgment could arise about that person. Well, that's a thought that is pulling someone out of pulling me into separation. Very subtly, but it is a thought that is divisive. So you can see how that, how that can be very helpful, just doing that throughout the day. But of course, it also happens in the meditation sessions. And it's going to be different for everybody, sort of what arises. Some might identify sort of deep-seated belief patterns that arise. For some, it might be interpersonal conflicts that they've had recently or in the distant past, resentments, unresolved issues, these kinds of things that come up. They're egoic thoughts that pull us out of wholeness, out of truth, into a sense of separation. So this is really a practice that you engage in when you've had a glimpse of wholeness. There's a glimpse of that no self, non-egoic state. But our conditioning keeps showing up, right? I mean, there can be a deep truth realized of the truth of our true nature, deeply realized, unshakable, but there's still a lot of conditioning that still exists within us. So it's this conditioning that slowly gets wringed out, I guess you could say. I mean, that just came to me. I don't know if that's a way to, it's kind of like wringing out, I guess, kind of, or releasing. Wringing out might be too strivey. It's kind of more of a releasing. And it's so this conditioning keeps showing up. It'll show up in our meditation practice, and it'll show up in the rough and tumble of our everyday lives. So as I said, it's a practice you can engage in throughout the day, identifying thoughts that pull you out of wholeness into separation. It's really, so it's taking everyday life as a key part of the practice. You could say that that's where the rubber hits the road in this seeing no self, in this awakening to no self. So seeing, it's all about seeing when we're going into separation. Is it a judgment? Is it a resentment? Is it blame? Or even a sense that things should or shouldn't be this way. Those are all the kinds of thoughts that can arise, that can be indicative of conditioning that's still lurking, still hanging around, even after an initial awakening. And so it also comes from a recognition that you're the only person that can cause you to suffer. And this is really important. You're the only person that can cause you to suffer and misperceive reality. Nothing in your external environment, other people, things, can cause you to fall out of awakening. Only you can cause that to happen. Well, it's your conditioning coming out that can cause that to happen. As Sylvia Borenstein, some of you may know her, an author, meditation author. She always likes to say, happiness is an inside job. She has a book with that same title, Happiness is an Inside Job. And it's really pointing to this truth that The recognition that you're the only person that can unenlighten yourself. Your natural state is one of awake, of wholeness, and we put ourselves into the trance of separation, and we're the ones that do that. So this recognition that that this is something that we do to ourselves is actually might be one of the most important realizations in this practice. Is having that realization, seeing that we're doing it to ourselves, unknowingly, mistakenly, often unconsciously. But we're doing this to ourselves. So after this, after an initial awakening to know self, we really begin to see karmic patterns, conditioning shift. There's a real shift. Before seeing no self, all of this conditioning is actually seen as being part of the self. Right? In fact, it's what we're identified with. all this conditioning. We define ourselves by all the conditioning, all the self conditioning. You know what I mean by conditioning when I say that? That word conditioning, all the stuff that's kind of happened to us in our lives, the stories we have about why we are the way we are, whether it's stuff our parents did or stuff that, a lot of it can go back to childhood. Some of the childhood conditioning is the deepest and perhaps more unconscious of the conditioning that we hold. But before there's an awakening to know self, that conditioning is actually how we define ourselves as a person. Our sense of self is our conditioning. It's our beliefs, our opinions, our desires, our struggles. This is how we define ourselves before awakening. After awakening, we simply see that conditioning arises. We don't take it personally. It's not taken personally. It's not seen as our core, as our nature, as a self. We don't believe the thoughts that arise, that pull us into a trance. We simply notice them. So in one of the kind of the practices that just kind of came out, I didn't go in with this intentionally. I mean, the part I've been explaining was intentional, but how I kind of dealt with the conditioning that came up kind of noticing. So the first thing was just to notice it, to be conscious enough to notice it, to allow it. And that may sound simple, but our tendency is to push pain away if it's painful conditioning. And the third is seeing it. And the fourth is accepting and bringing in an element of compassion if necessary. So noticing, allowing, seeing, and accepting with compassion was kind of the process I ended up going through with as different aspects of karmic. Karmics just means old stuff from the past, conditioning. Just it's a a Buddhist term that refers to, we talk about karma. It's just the cause and effect of these patterns as they move through forward. So we kind of realize that this is not happening to anybody. Right? So we're not taking it personally. This is not happening. It's just arising. It's no one's fault. It's just what's arising, wanting to be seen. As there's a real sense of that. So as Adyashanti says, Adyashanti is the partner of Mukti, who you had a talk with. Adyashanti says, and Adyashanti translates in Sanskrit to primordial peace. I love that. That's like one of my favorite names, primordial peace. He says, life itself is your greatest ally. Life will show us where we are not clear. Life will show us where we are not clear. And life is whether you're sitting in on a meditation cushion, or walking down the street, or having a meal with someone, or sitting at a meeting. That's life. So for me personally, I saw 4 kinds of trance thoughts. Old, some of them old, and some of them not so old. Trance thoughts arise, the unenlightening thoughts. One was just thoughts which divide, little judgments. Didn't realize how I would form little judgments. Very subtle, even, like, it's somebody who would walk by and they'd have, bed head. So that after the afternoon nap, the hair, and there's no mirrors in the room. So, I mean, you really don't know what you look like when you leave your room. So little thought would arise, oh, that person has bed head. They should have combed their hair. Then I just go, wow, that's amazing. That thought would arise. I didn't take it personally. I just kind of, that's, so those just little what people were eating. Even I'd kind of go, wow, that's a funny thing to eat. That they bring their own thing, and it'd be kind of some different, and be a little, that's peculiar, that's what they want to eat. But the little kind of judgment would arise. So those were the kinds of and another one was a little bit of look at me, wonderful me thoughts. I've been doing this for a long time, and still this thought still arose sitting in the meditation hall. There's 3 of us left. Somebody rustled, and I thought, oh, they're going to leave, and I'll be the last one. I thought, oh, that's quite the thought, right? That's a wonderful me kind of thought. So I have this kind of wonderful me filter now, and it's actually a really nice filter to have if that's something that comes up as old thought patterns. Call it the look at me, or the wonderful me filter, and you can kind of notice, there it is. Oh, there's that pattern. There it is. There's that pattern. So that was one kind of unenlightening thought pattern. The other one was trying to figure it out thought pattern that would arise. It's this mind would kind of arise. It wants to figure stuff out. And so I would go, there's that figuring out mind. There it is. It's wanting to figure out. Just kind of notice it. And striving thoughts, of course, I think these are thoughts that we all have to some degree, that we notice. And even after seeing no self, we start to see, there's this aspect of, still some aspect of self wanting something from this, right? The self wanting something from this whole spiritual project. Because I mean, really, the self entered this whole thing thinking it was going to get something out of it, right? Think about yourself went into this thinking, yeah, I'm going to be, I could be really nice. This would probably make me, I'd be more compassionate. People might like me more. I could be, this and that. And the self actually enters into this whole project, totally engaged, thinking, I'm going to get something out of this. And then at some point, it's like the tables are turned. And now it's like, I'm not getting anything out of this. In fact, I'm going to be annihilated. It's like the dream of me is going to be annihilated. So it's kind of a switch and bait almost for the self, if you know what I mean, or bait and switch, where you kind of, the self is in it for a while, and then it suddenly realizes, oh, there's nothing actually in this for me. But there's still some little remnants of self thoughts that come up, like, oh, I'd like to be more of this, or I'd like to be more of that. That comes up. So it's noticing those. The fourth one didn't come up too much, doer thoughts, since that I'm controlling what's arising. It maybe came up a little bit at the beginning of the retreat, but near the end, it was kind of flowing with the natural unfolding of things. So those were the four. So, and you'll have, like I say, you may have different ones, but if you'll know if they're pulling you into separation or into trance. You get a real bodily sense of that. It's not just a mental cerebral process. It's very much a felt experience of being pulled into this trance state. So again, noticing, allowing, seeing, and accepting with compassion. And another part that's central to this is realizing that it's natural. In one of my teacher interviews, I brought this up, and she said it's natural to be pulled in and out of wholeness in this way, right? Because it can seem like a process of I got it, I lost it. Like, you've probably gone through that, where you think, oh, I've got this. I feel the peace and the tranquility, and the love and compassion, the wisdom. And then, it's there like that for days, maybe weeks, months, and then all of a sudden stuff happens and you feel like, oh, it's all out the window. I've lost it, right? This kind of, I got it, I lost it. And it can, and it can flow moment to moment as well. So it's natural to go through this in and out of wholeness process. We feel whole in one moment, even and separate in the next, from moment to moment. So this is natural, and this is simply a very simple process of clearing out old patterns. It's a very simple process of just clearing out these old patterns. So we're really, we're starting to see these old patterns in a very clear and vivid way. And I realized as they showed themselves, these patterns, that they were, especially near the end of the retreat, they were largely unconscious patterns, but they were also driving ways of my behavior in the world, and thought patterns that arose. So we really see in a clear and vivid way these old patterns as they arise. So we're not doing therapy. It's not therapy. We're not investigating old patterns to try and fix ourselves, to become a better me. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And I mean, if you go to a therapist, that's what you'll work on, right? You'll work on becoming a better me. Therapist isn't going to try to work on you, awakening to the illusion of me. Right? They're gonna. I mean, maybe some do these days. I don't know, but I think there are kind of non-dual therapists out there, you could call them, that would work in that way. But for the most part, psychoanalysis, psychotherapy is working on improving the me, and there's nothing, again, as I said, there's nothing wrong with that. We might as well if you're living in a dream state, you might as well make the dream as pleasant as you can. Right? Might as well, right? It's, I mean, I've heard one teacher call it's like redecorating your prison cell, but I don't know if that might be. I've heard Adyashanti say it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, which I don't know if I think there's, you can have more, there can be more actual benefit from it than perhaps those metaphors point to. But it's, so, wanting to fix yourself, you're still operating from within the dream state, within the illusion of the self, right? And as I said, that can be useful if you're staying in that dream state. It can make your dream state more comfortable. But so this is not therapy. That's important to recognize. Okay. Another part of this, I'm talking longer than I thought, is to avoid spiritual bypassing in this whole process. This term spiritual bypassing was coined in the mid-'80s by John Wellwood. And it basically involves, using these spiritual ideas and these practices, that we engage in here to avoid facing unresolved emotional and psychological issues in your life. So it's kind of using these to avoid it, to kind of, in some ways suppress it. So it's kind of hiding from life and our experience of it. So it's a dismissing of these thought patterns that pull us back into trance. Here, we're not dismissing them or avoiding them. We're actually noticing, allowing, seeing them for what they are, and accepting them with compassion. So we're willing to look at them. And really a key attitude to bring to it would be an attitude of sincerity and honesty in seeing, in the willingness to uncover and see these old patterns. And it actually becomes quite seamless when they're not taken personally, right? They only shake us up when we take them so personally, when we believe them and believe that they're happening to a me. Some people find writing them down very helpful. I was doing a lot of that. I brought a journal and I was writing down, what happened, the thought pattern that arose, the thought pattern that, if it triggered a re-identification with the egoic mind, just kind of write down what the pattern was, the story, and there's this kind of like, oh, there it is, and there's in the writing of it down, there's just kind of a releasing of it, right? There's the story, it had some belief to it, right? If it had juice to pull me back into separation, there it is, and there it goes. The deepest ones I found that came out later and took the longest were the childhood patterns, as I said, that were more unconscious, more hidden, and actually were behind more obvious patterns, but deeper behind it were childhood issues. Yeah, I think I'll stop there and open it up for any questions. Any questions about what I just said, or even questions about sort of what silent treats are and what they're like, and the overall purpose, and so on. That if that's of interest. Yeah, Anita?
Okay, wasn't sure. Okay, so I'm definitely interested in sort of knowing more about the retreat, and I didn't think they were happening anymore because of the pandemic, and also sort of where it was and how it was, and just generally, yeah, like it's how it works. What's the environment? It'd be nice since you were there, and to kind of help us see what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've done dozens of retreats all over the place over the years. So then they're all a little bit different, different kind of flavors and approaches to them. So maybe I'll just talk specifically about what is the Insight Meditation Society in Barrie, Massachusetts. There's 3 centers there. There's the Insight Meditation Society Center, there's Forest Refuge, and there's the Barrie Center for Buddhist Studies. Now, if you go to Insight Meditation Society, it's for a defined period. So you'll show up for 3-day, 5-day, 7-day, 10-day, 3-month retreat, and everybody shows up at the same time. And there's a schedule, so they ring bells a lot, every 45 minutes, basically. And you go from sitting to walking, and so there's a Dharma talk every night. It's very structured, and you're with the same people for the whole 3 days or whatever the period is. Forest Refuge is all very unstructured. There's no bells except at meal times, and you're left on your own to set your own schedule, and people are coming and going. So they started retreats at IMS and Forest Refuge on the day I arrived. So I didn't realize that, but November 1st was their first day of operation. I just happened to sign up for it on their first day of operation. So yeah, they're at half capacity at Forest Refuge, so 20 of us at any one time instead of 40. And yeah, so it's very unstructured. There's only two Dharma talks a week at Forest Refuge. IMS has one every day. And you get 2 15-minute meetings with a teacher each week at Forest Refuge. I think you probably get the same at IMS. For the most part, you get, if you're there for longer retreats, it's, I believe, 2, maybe 3. I don't know for sure. It's actually been a while since I've been at a retreat at IMS, but that's where I started, right? Was IMS retreats. Well, I started actually living with the monks. I didn't know what I was getting into. I should have started with an IMS retreat, but I got somehow invited to live with Zen monks and ended up meditating for an hour and a half at 4 o'clock in the morning. and then the day goes from there. That's a whole other story, but I don't, it was actually helpful for me in some bizarre way, but I wouldn't recommend it as a normal path of practice to go into an extended situation like that. But they were very kind to me, and that helped. So that's Forest Refuge, beautiful facility built in 2004. It's like a zendo kind of shape to it, and it's just a really nice, simple environment to practice in. But you are left on your own, so you meditate in your room, in the hall, wherever you want, outside, standing up, sitting down, wherever, it's completely up to you how and when you practice. And I thought I had in my head that Forest Refuge would be people that were more seasoned in their practice and had been to a lot of retreats, but it wasn't that way at all, really. I think it was just people that wanted to have more freedom in how they set up their practice. I could, kind of tell from the talks that, and they do little morning reflections that are nice. At 8:30, everybody gathered, and one of the teachers did a morning reflection, which was kind of like a mini Dharma talk almost, and kind of guided people in what kind of practices you could engage in. And based on what the teachers were saying, I got the real impression that there were a lot of people that were fairly new to the practice, because she was talking about ways of dealing with difficult emotions, and kind of your mindfulness, practice, basic mindfulness practice. She didn't give no self talks to the group, put it that way. So that's the retreat center. And there's other ones as well. And of course, True North Insight hasn't started a retreats up yet, but does retreats at Galilee and Arnprior. And there's the Dharma Center of Canada down Highway 7 in Kinburn that do some really interesting retreats. And Buddhist Society of Canada of Ottawa does retreats. Often these days they're monastic teachers. Ajahn Veradamo he's a great teacher. I mean, teaches like any other teacher. There might be some chanting and stuff, but I kind of like chanting. It's kind of, gives you that, you kind of get a vibe. It really does kind of settle the body in a particular way, using the voice and vocalizing in that way. So that's another option. So there's lots of options in there. It's just a way to really deepen in your practice. Like you can really kind of dive into it. Like I said, I did 8 months worth of meditation in 3 weeks, if you added up the hours. So that's a deep, sitting for an hour every morning and maybe a little bit in the afternoon, and you practice throughout the day too, but it's not the same as this kind of the depth of subtlety. Like I don't think the deep karmic patterns that revealed themselves during this retreat would have done so during my daily practice, my usual daily practice. I don't know, but just a feeling I have. But like I said, I don't really know. Yeah. Sometimes people find them quite torturous. because it's just, a barrage of difficulties, I'll admit the early, the first retreat I went to that was 7 days, I think I cried through the whole thing. I'd be sitting there in a room and just tears because just so much stuff was flooding through. And, I heard that people even break silence and kind of say to the teachers, "He's going to be okay. He's been sitting there, weeping for an hour." So, I didn't find it difficult because it felt cleansing for stuff to be able to kind of self-liberate in that way. And it was a loving kindness retreat, so that does bring up a lot of unresolved resentments, could say, ones you've even forgot you had. Tons of them. Problems with people I had buried so deep, I didn't think, it wasn't even in my mind, but to it's an opportunity to come out. Yeah, so that's hope that answers your question, Anita.
Hi, Stephen.
Hi.
Welcome back. We, as I said, missed you. And hi, everyone. So I have a question. It might be simplistic, but, you're talking about untangling the tangle and conditioning, and I understand that. But the other day, one of my clients was telling us about a car accident that she had, and she hit an oncoming person straight on because she looked away for a moment. So it was her fault. And she injured the person, and she just can't get it out of her head. So in cases like that, where, this isn't conditioning, this is something that we have hurt somebody, or I think of maybe even people that have killed other people. How do we, I understand conceptually not taking it personally, but how can we not? When we've hurt someone in that way, it just, yeah. I'm just thinking about that, because those are the things that come up for me the most. And I know the thought pattern is, I'm a bad person. But when you've actually hurt someone, then how do you reconcile with that? Anyway, that's all. Thank you.
I won't answer for the person that the client. Because, and I'm not saying this is how one would relate to the client. The way I'm going to relate with you right now is not the way I would relate to a client. The way I'm going to relate to you right now is not even from a person to a person. I'm going to relate to you more as spirit to spirit or truth to truth. You don't actually do anything. There's no doer. There's no doer in any of this. And that's one of the aspects of self that we really have to see deeply, is that you're not in control of your life in any way. You're not a doer. You're not in control, and you can see this in your direct experience in your practice. And once you've kind of realized this at a very deep level, you realize there's no doer. And this is a real key aspect of the practice. And it's not there's always been a fear in Buddhism that offering these teachings to people before they're ready will create the impression that there's no personal responsibility, and there's and I can just do whatever the hell I want because there's nobody here and there's nothing there's nothing happening. So it's not that, right? It's not that at all. There is a responsibility. You know, and the Buddha took a middle path in that way. You know, people talk about the middle path in all kinds of ways, but it was actually a middle path between complete materialism, that you're in complete control, and nihilism, where there's just all meaningless and there's no, you know, nothing to be done. And those were actually the debates going on in India at the time. And he took a middle path where everything is real and unreal, existent and non-existent. There's no doer, but there's doing. And the doing is important. Your manifestation in the world is as much truth as anything else. It's as holy as anything else. But ultimately, there's no doer. To hear it, of course, the egoic mind reacts, does not like to hear that, because if one thing the egoic mind figures it has is control. So it's the egoic mind every time will react to that statement with no, that's impossible, and come up with lots of reasons why it's impossible, right? So this has to be directly seen. The first time I saw it was in walking meditation, and I think I've shared this before here, but not for some time. I was doing my walking meditation, and you know, for me, I walk back and forth on a path, right? And then I turn around, and then I walk 10 feet, stop, turn around, walk 10 feet. So I was stopping, and I saw the intent for a thought arise to turn. I thought, where did that come from? I didn't intend that thought. So then I just stood there, and then to turn to the, you know, say to the right. And then I saw another thought, intention to turn and start walking to the left. And I just stood there. I'm not doing any of this. And I can't, you know, I could even stand here and say, I'm not going to have a thought to turn. And I will have a thought would arise to turn. So in that moment, I thought, I'm actually not controlling any of this. I'm not in control of walking meditation, when it stops and starts. And so that was my first kind of glimpse into it. And then, you know, from there, you just keep kind of seeing how this is actually at the most fundamental level true. The truth of our existence. But I'll say it again, it has to be seen directly. It's just to hear it is the ego. Some of your minds probably reacted right away as soon as I said it, perhaps, or even at a subtle level. You're not in control. There's no doer. Right? There's no self to do. Right? I mean, we've worked through the whole process we've worked through, and seeing, you know, awakening to no self was seeing that we're not the body. We spent one session, but you could spend lots of more time exploring that you're not the body. So we're not thoughts. Thoughts just arise without your consent. And you can really see that moment to moment, investigating that. And of course, we're not emotions. Emotions are simply the body manifesting a thought as a feeling. If you're not a thought, you're not an emotion, because they're connected. And so then you kind of, okay, I'm not my perceptions that arise. The feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, that just arises. I'm not that. So just kind of go through and say, okay, I'm not, there's nothing here. There's no self. So what could possibly be doing? All, you know, what could possibly be in control of your life? This is why we suffer, because we think as egoic selves, we think we're in control. We think we can find happiness by struggling with what is. If I can get enough of the good stuff, push away enough of the bad stuff, I can find happiness. And this is the struggle that I call it the struggle. This is suffering. This is what is pointed to as suffering. It boils down to this belief in a self that's in control, is the doer of our lives. So if you believe that you're in control of your life and shit happens, it's your fault. I mean, it's not really, but if based on that belief, right? Of course, that's why you beat yourself up. I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done this. Of course, it's just the oneness unfolding. It's nature. It's nature unfolding. You're not going to control any aspect of nature unfolding. The trees just unfold. It's all just it's just nature, and we're part of. We're local manifestations of that oneness, which is nature. Again, that's not the answer I would give to a client. You might not have the same clients that you had before. You might have completely different ones. I don't know. I have a good friend who's a therapist, psychoanalyst, and is very deeply into the teachings. And I always ask him how he goes, I'm helping them redecorate their prison cells for a while, and then, get to a certain level of happiness, because people have real traumas that they need to they relate to, and you can help people through that process. And but again, it's different than what we're doing here. Yeah, I hope that scratches the surface a little bit, and I hope it wasn't too antagonistic to any egoic minds that are out there.
No, it was very helpful. Thank you. Through our practices over the past few months, I've been intentional about allowing without judgment. But in doing that, every time I allow previous thoughts that I try to put under the rug, then my ego tries to grasp onto it and go, oh, I remember that one. Remember when we were bad? And then I try to control. You use the word control. So I do try to control, and I do cling. And so I'm just, so it's good to know that there's a possibility of not doing that, because my ego tells me, well, this is how you're going to live. If you're going to think about the thoughts, it's just going to be there forever. So just don't think about the thoughts. So I'm just trying to allow, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So thank you. That was very helpful.
Yeah. And this is all very natural. I mean, again, we don't want to judge ourselves for having these patterns, right? It's very natural to have. In fact, we're wired to have these ways. I mean, if we were just had a funny thought. If we were born enlightened, if everybody was born enlightened, we'd all die. I see Mike turning that one over. But think about it. The egoic self keeps us alive. We're hungry, we want food, we find food. We're cold, we find it's what a bunch of enlightened people roaming around wouldn't really be doing anything. They might, but if everybody was born enlightened, you just kind of go, hi, how's it going? Hey, it's a day. How's it going with you? It's a day. capitalism would be a flop. It's like, I'm not sure what would work. I don't think we'd survive. I think if we have a shift in consciousness as adults, that's a whole different story. I think we can, shift our way of being in the world, so that it's not, so much insanity. Yeah, not killing each other and so on and so forth. Yeah. Mike, yes.
You did it. So
forget the
I'm
abort.
gonna argue that yes, we are born enlightened. However, we don't stay so.
Good point.
We're automatically assailed by conditions which put dust in our eyes, right? Yeah. The caveat to that statement is if we were born and stayed enlightened,
yeah,
then we'd die, and I'm totally down with that. Yes. Back to your previous statement about, so how would forgiveness practices, which can be really transformative, without a self, like, is it just fluff then? Are you forgiving nothing? Yeah.
well, who's forgiving who?
Yeah, one ego forgiving another.
Yeah. I don't want to, you said use the word fluff, and I don't want to make it sound like all those practices are fluff in any way. They're all very, helpful in moving people to the teachings. But you can really look at the teachings of the Buddha as one of two types, either provisional or definitive. And the Tibetans have divided up the teachings in this way. And the definitive teachings are the teachings on no self or emptiness, as the Tibetans would call it. The same thing we've been talking about, they would call it emptiness, as Guy Armstrong did in his book called Emptiness. So it's not only Tibetans that use that term, but it comes from, Nagarjuna and his writings on emptiness. All the other teachings are provisional in the sense that they're helpful in clarifying aspects of the teaching, but they're not definitive teachings. So I would say they're not fluff, but they're provisional teachings. A lot of what I've taught over the last 10 years has been provisional teachings. This is the first time really that I've taught the definitive teachings. Because I felt like I was starting to live through the definitive teachings. Before I was living, you can only teach at the level of your consciousness, right? You can't, if you teach beyond it, it just becomes an academic exercise. So I've been teaching a lot of, and they're beautiful teachings. Forgiveness is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful teaching. If you're holding on to blame and you're for something they did in the past, you're literally chained to that person. And forgiveness it cuts that chain. So it's very freeing for the mind, clearing for the mind, and allows other aspects of the practice. So the Buddha would always teach to the person, to the level of consciousness of the person. So there's always, always appropriate times for forgiveness teachings, loving kindness teachings, gratitude, all the paramitas, right? Patience. I practiced with patience for years. Yeah. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
This is kind of adequate. I guess this is kind of along the same lines of provisional and definitive teachings. Would you say, I guess, would you say relative and absolute teachings, that those things that you've talked about before, like the relative, the sense of the relative versus the sense of the absolute being kind of similar to provisional and definitive? Because when you were talking about saying that you're the only person that can cause you to suffer, to me that seems like a very kind of like a provisional teaching. I don't know, because we're not really in control at all. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so yes, that's the way that it's the mindset that we have, or that I have, that, you know, I'm a self unto myself that exists independently of all the other selves, and that's what causes my suffering. But ultimately, I'm not really even in control of that. So it's even ego. I feel like ego. I feel like it's very liberating. I've come to see ego more as ego is another form of awareness. It's just I can become deluded into thinking that ego is actually, you know, something that exists on itself and, you know, is the most important, you know, that voice is the most important thing in my life. But I've come to see it more as just being another manifestation of awareness that we just need to observe and not pass judgment on. Just be with it, and surrender ourselves into the moment. And I don't really know how to say it, like just see what happens, and then it just kind of passes. So anyways, I'll leave it at that, but thank you.
Yeah, of course, there is no ego, right? There's no ego. It's the ego is a the ego is an illusion, the same way the self is. The whole point of this is seeing the illusory nature of the ego. And the ego is just a term I've used to identify, you know, the thoughts and emotions, the psychological processes that we think are a self. So that's just a word that I gave to, it's just shorthand for thoughts, emotions, and other psychological processes. So these are processes that we identify with as a self, which are not. So it's an illusion. So we're simply, there is no ego in the sense there's no self, right? Where the practice is seeing the truth of that it is an illusion. It's a magic show. What were the metaphors the Buddha used? The body is foam. Perceptions were a mirage. Thoughts were like a plantain tree, a hollow tree. Like consciousness is like a magic trick. And there's another one, but they're all just, you know, kind of ephemeral. You know, they're not the metaphors he is using. Magic trick. It's like a mirage. If you've seen a mirage, like a dream, it's an illusion. self, but we identify with it, and that's what creates the suffering. In terms of this provisional, you know, I don't know if I should have put that out there. It can get confusing because a lot of teachings are provisional, even what teachings that sound definitive, because ultimately everything's empty. A definitive teaching would be everything is empty, including emptiness. There's no ultimate truth and relative truth. It's all empty. There's no yeah, you put anything, put any word in front of emptiness and it's true. And so that's a definitive teaching, right? The emptiness is even emptiness. So you're letting go ultimately. So I'm guiding you through a process where you're letting go of absolutely everything. There's no identification. So what I'd like to move you in, I should end now, but I'd like to move you into, so we've been talking about resting in awareness, right? And so what resting in awareness is a gateway, but you're not awareness. Right? I've simply been offering you that as a way to step back from identification with those more sticky aspects of self. So now the next step for us is to see that, yeah, we're also not awareness. That's not who we truly are. So basically what I've done is brought you through a process of disidentification with thoughts, emotions, body, perceptions, Vedana, and left you with identifying with the still aware presence of awareness. So now the self can identify with, okay, that I am the still aware presence. Now at this point, I'm going to pull the rug out from under that, and you're not the still aware presence of awareness. So that's what I'd like to take you through next, is seeing that you're also not that. So we're getting really close to the ultimate teachings, right? I mean, you can, it's a doorway. Still aware presence is a doorway. It gets you closer, right? To the gateless gate, as the Zen they like to call it, the gateless gate, because the gates, there's not only is the gate open, there's no gate there. it's like you're already there. So yeah, so that's where I'd like to take you next week, if you're game, to beyond awareness, the place beyond awareness. And don't worry if you're kind of not keeping up with this. This is like a process that you can kind of go through. I don't know, maybe I should do an overview at some point, kind of, okay, this is where the path we've, not the path, but this is where we've kind of been. You think that would be helpful before we get into your not awareness? I was going to drop that on you, but it's kind of a teaser, right? To get you to come back next week. But this is a crucial, also actually the crucial shift to, we've been looking at no ego, right? You're not your ego. Now we're shifting to there's just no self. It's all an illusion. It's just nature unfolding. There's nothing, there's no doer, there's no awarenessing, or there's no consciousnessing, or it's nature unfolding. But I'd love to take that journey with you. If you're game, we could start it next week. Yeah. Okay, I see some heads nodding. Is everybody with me on this?
Yes.